Hey, Sasha here. Thanks for joining me on this short video on the Contour tool in Affinity Designer 2 for working with seam allowance. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the Contour tool in Affinity Designer for adding or removing seam allowance. I have a leggings pattern piece pulled up here that I generated from Fearless Makers, I believe it's called. Pretty cool tool. I'll link that. Free for all to use. Pretty amazing, very comprehensive measurement system. Yeah, I haven't sewn anything up that I've generated yet, but I was just playing with this the other day, so I figured I'd pull it up. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of the seam allowance that we already have. All right, so to add seam allowance to a pattern piece, it has to be a fully joined pattern piece. Let's just see what happens if I selected all of this and went to my contour tool, mitered corners, and I wanted to add back my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Oops. We get lots and lots of boxes around each segment because it's not a joined pattern piece. And I also selected the words, and you can see the chaos that made. So let's just undo that and instead actually prepare our pattern to add seam allowance back on. So of course I only want to add seam allowance to the outside pattern piece. So we need to select all of these that we would like to join. Looks like there might be separate segments here. I'm probably going to end up removing the seam allowance from down here, but I think it'll be easier to just join it all in the first place. Since this is the hem allowance, we don't really need to add any more to that. Okay, so we go to our node tool. And is this the join? I believe it is. Join curves. Now, let's just see what happens now when we use our contour tool. Let's just see. What in the world? Why is it doing that, you say? Well, even though everything might be joined, we still need to close the curve. So joined and closed is the recipe for success with adding your seam allowance with the contour tool. So let's go ahead and undo that and go back to our node tool. I think this is the close curve. All right, now I always like to create a copy because when you use the contour tool, it is going to make the changes to the curve that you have selected. So when we add the seam allowance, I'll just go ahead and show you. We're adding the seam allowance. It's showing you a preview of what that looks like, and you see there's a little weirdness up here, which we'll go over in a minute. It's showing you the changes, but in order to make those changes permanent and changeable, you have to go over to Bake Appearance. And now you see that that original line is gone. I don't like that. I like to see both my cut line and my seam line. So I'm gonna undo, and go to my Move tool, copy and paste. So I'm making changes to a copy. Contour tool, 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to go ahead and Bake Appearance. I'm going to take a look all the way around. And okay, so this is a very common issue with the contour tool in Affinity Designer. I've spent probably way too much time trying to look at my original curve, trying to figure out why this happens, and in all honesty, it's not worth the time. So just click on your new shape and start moving things around to correct it. That is the quickest way, without driving yourself crazy, to get rid of this. And you can, delete some of these. Wonder what happens if I delete that one. Yeah, so it's reassigned. The end is reassigned over here. Kind of straighten it up so that it looks, like it makes sense, like it's even all the way around. I think it looks pretty good. You can delete this extra node there. And there we have it. We've added seam allowance with the contour tool. And in the same way, you can make things smaller or remove seam allowance if you don't already have, a seam line here. It's just adding, instead of typing in a positive number, you're typing in a negative number. Now I want to go back here and remove this. And honestly, I'm just going to drag and select both of those points, hit my shift key and my arrow key, and just move that right on up. And now I just have my nice little hem allowance there. So there you have it, a quick little overview of using the contour tool to add seam allowance.